políticas actuales. Ayer escuché detenidamente las intervenciones de mis homólogos. Concuerdo con la necesidad de que América Latina y África cuenten con un puesto permanente en el Consejo de Seguridad para que esa integración se refleje verdaderamente en la toma de decisiones vinculantes sobre la paz y la seguridad internacionales. Excelencias, el mundo no puede esperar más. Panamá será miembro no permanente de este Consejo a partir de enero del 2025 y estamos comprometidos a trabajar por un Consejo más inclusivo, efectivo y capaz de cumplir con su mandato. Pero para lograrlo, necesitamos renovar nuestra voluntad política y restaurar la confianza y el respeto mutuo entre los Estados. Solo así podremos construir un futuro en el que la paz, la seguridad y el respeto a la dignidad humana sean una realidad para todos. La coyuntura mundial nos demanda actuar con determinación, superar las divisiones y demostrar al mundo que este Consejo puede cumplir con su propósito. La historia nos juzgará por nuestras acciones y, más importante aún, por nuestras inacciones. Hagamos lo propio y lo necesario para que ese juicio nos sea favorable. Muchísimas gracias a todos por esta ocasión.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Mulino Quintero for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Pavel, President of the Czech Republic.
Madam President, Excellencies, it is a true honor for me to address the Security Council today, and I would like to thank Slovenian Presidency for this opportunity. Clearly, no country can deliver the global peace on its own. To provide our citizens with security and conditions for peaceful development, we believe the world, on one hand, needs an operational and effective multilateral institution, and on the other, their members accepting their responsibility. As to the first point, a comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council towards making it more effective, inclusive, accountable, and better reflecting today's realities by strengthening the voice of the underrepresented regions, especially but not limited to Africa, is essentially needed. Without structural and procedural changes, the Council's performance and legitimacy will inevitably suffer. Overdue of the reform of the Security Council is blatantly exposed in the face of the Russian war against Ukraine. The UN Security Council membership is not a privilege. It is first and foremost a responsibility to defend global peace and security entrusted to the Council's members on behalf of us all. To my second point, global security depends on the efforts and willingness of the Council's member to assume that responsibility. What Russia is demonstrating is the exact opposite. The war in Ukraine is shaking the very foundations of our collective security. Russia's declared goal to subjugate Ukraine by force ramifies far beyond the region. It has global consequences that include impairing nuclear safety, diminishing food and energy security, but also a dangerous attempt of damaging rules-based international order. The third year of this war, it is evident that Russia would not be capable of all of this on its own. Let me use this opportunity to recall also China's responsibility as a global actor and a permanent member of the UN Security Council to work for peace and stability. It is not sustainable that China continues to fuel the biggest security challenge by delivering the tools Russia needs to build its military capacity against Ukraine and its people. China should fulfill the role it aspires to play. Being a major global player means not only the benefits, but also a huge responsibility for global peace and security. I therefore invite China to use its uniquely close relations with Russia to bring about an end to the bloodshed in Ukraine and all the associated threats to the world security. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership is about responsibility and also about commitment to keeping peace. Leadership for peace, this is our goal and our duty. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Pavel for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohamed Muizzu, President of the Republic of Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this open debate. And thank you, Mr. Secretary General, President Sirleaf, and President of the IFRC for your comprehensive briefs. This is the first time that a Maldivian president is addressing the Security Council in the 59 years since we have been a UN member. I came to speak to you because I felt it is important to personally convey to the Security Council a message from the Maldivian people about the immense responsibility that the Council holds in maintaining global peace and security, about the immense hope with which that the people of the world look up to the Council, and about the immense failure of this Council in giving hope to the hopeless and salvation to the suffering. Global mistrust in the multilateral system continues to grow, and that is largely because of the ineffectiveness in inaction of the Council. We sit here today while a genocide unfolds under the nose of a Security Council unwilling to uphold international law and put an end to it. On the 16th of November last year, 36 UN special rapporteurs and experts referred to a genocide in the making in Gaza. They were designated experts by this organization, the UN. In July of this year, the International Court of Justice found that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal, that Israel must evacuate settlements and pay reparation to Palestinians. Members of this council are expected to work to enforce findings by the UN's own principal judicial organ. This organization must listen to its own voices. The people of the world are listening. The people of the world are watching. In May, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court sought arrest warrants in relation to the war in Gaza. The world expects Security Council members to support the process of justice and not to do anything to undermine it. It was member states of this council who established the principles, institutions, and architecture of a rule-based order, a world order based on justice. That architecture is now crumbling under the rubble of destroyed homes, hospitals, and schools, disintegrating under the weight of the bodies of innocent civilians in Gaza and Lebanon. An architecture decaying, stained with the blood of those whose very existence is supposed to be a symbol of a civilized world order, from aid workers to UN staff to journalists from Palestine, Lebanon, and Al Jazeera, who Israel has killed or closed their offices while they risk everything to ensure we don't all return to a world where children and babies die in silence, perish in darkness. Powerful members of this council, is this really the world you want us to lead into? Powerful members of this council, is this really the example you want to set for others? Powerful members of this council, do you really want to undermine the foundations of global order that you have built? The decline in trust in the Security Council is rooted in the lack of equal representation, accountability, and transparency. It's fueled by the Council's selective intervention in maintaining security for some, but not for others. We need change, and we need it now. The Security Council must become more representative. Its composition is archaic and outdated, out of touch with the realities of UN membership today. For example, small island developing states are 1/5 of UN membership. Our voices matter. Our perspectives matter. Our wealth of experience in conflict resolution, rooted in our traditions of community and cooperation, matter. We deserve a seat at the table. A permanent rotating seat for seats will be a historic step towards equitable representation. So, will the efforts to address the historic injustice towards Africa in the Council, which we wholeheartedly support. An inclusive and representative Council will be a more effective Council. An effective Council will also practice what it preaches. The Council cannot expect democracy and accountability in UN member states without practicing the same in the Council. We know the solution. It requires courage and a strong will. We must abolish the veto. The veto continues to paralyze the Council from stopping Israel's genocidal war against the Palestinian people. The veto has allowed Israel to continue with impunity in practicing brutal occupation and risking regional security. The veto continues to enable the massacre of innocent people. So let us kill the veto. Let us also bring an end to the ineffective intergovernmental negotiations that have not produced a result for more than 15 years. Let us start fresh with renewed hope and fresh resolve. Let us start a new intergovernmental process with text-based negotiations. I urge the new President of the General Assembly to conclude the process before the end of the 79th session. The Council must also accept and address the implications of non-traditional security threats. The link between climate change and conflict is clear. Pandemics and disasters have proven to be devastating on a global scale. Lack of water and depletion of other natural resources are already creating chaos. As we witnessed in Lebanon a few days ago, technology has advanced to a stage that detonating devices in your own pockets remotely is now a reality. If the Security Council is not more flexible and agile in effectively responding to these new and emerging threats, it runs the risk of being buried in the dust. As countries take matters into their own hands, it will lead to more chaos and more conflict. To address this, the Council must listen to the people it serves, experts, civil society, regional bodies, and individuals. I call for the establishment of a mechanism where people can provide the Council with innovative and real-time solutions. Let us trust the people we are elected to serve so that they too will trust us again. Madam President, the Maldives is a small country, but we are a proud member of the UN. As our first act after regaining our independence 59 years ago, we requested to join the UN. We have always placed our faith in the multilateral system and the United Nations. As a guarantor of our sovereignty, of our equality, we are not questioning the value of the UN. But because the Security Council acts on our behalf and we are obliged to accept and carry out decisions by the Council, we have a right to question its work and its methods. Talk is cheap. We deserve better than empty rhetoric and half-hearted gestures. We demand better. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Muizu for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs, President of the Republic of Latvia.
Thank you. Madam President, I would like to thank Slovenia as the presidency of the Security Council for convening this timely debate. We are in search of solutions for a more secure future. But we must first sort out the present. The current state of our world is deeply concerning. The speed in which the principles of global norms are being tested is alarming. It is most visible in Ukraine, Middle East, Sudan, and in many other places across the globe. Upholding global support for Ukraine is of utmost importance for peace and security. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine directly undermines the United Nations Charter. We strongly condemn Russia's aggression, enabled by support of Belarus, Iran, and North Korea. Russia must unconditionally and immediately withdraw all troops and military equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine. In Gaza, the humanitarian crisis has escalated to alarming levels. The priority remains ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access. We welcome the ongoing efforts towards ending hostilities. It is crucial for addressing the humanitarian catastrophe as well as preventing regional spillover. We commend the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross efforts to facilitate humanitarian assistance in Gaza. All parties must ensure the protection of civilians in line with international humanitarian law. We should focus on the peace process and the two-state solution. In Sudan, people continue to endure a devastating humanitarian and human rights emergency. The reports of serious abuses, such as arbitrary arrests and sexual and gender-based violence, are very disturbing. We call for the parties to cease hostilities and adhere to their obligations under international law. Humanitarian aid must be allowed to reach all parts of Sudan. The protection of civilians is of paramount importance. Madam President, we must defend the integrity of our global system to ensure that our world is not governed by fear and conflict, but by peace and mutual respect. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rinkevic for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abulgaid, Secretary General of the League of Arab States.
سيادة الرئيس، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، اسمحوا لي أن أبدأ بشكركم على اختياركم الموضوع هذا الاجتماع رفيع المستوى وعلى الورقة المفاهيمية المتميزة التي تعكس بوضوح الوعي الكامل بأزمة الثقة الكبيرة التي يعاني منها النظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف في الأمم المتحدة. لقد انعكست أزمات النظام الدولي وما شهدته الأعوام الماضية من تصاعد واضح لمنافسات القوى الكبرى على المنطقة العربية، فشهدنا حالة تشبه الشلل والعجز الكامل في التعامل مع نزاعات خطيرة كانت لها كلفة إنسانية هائلة وتبعات تتجاوز المنطقة العربية إلى ما ورائها. وأقول بصراحة سيادة الرئيس أن منطقتنا تقف في مفترق طرق خطير، فإما أن يتوقف هذا التصعيد الإجرامي الذي تمارسه دولة الاحتلال إسرائيل في قطاع غزة والضفة الغربية ومؤخراً في لبنان، وإما ستتسع دائرة النار والدمار وتخرج الأمور عن السيطرة. لا أحد في المنطقة العربية يريد حرباً إقليمية، فنحن نعرف جيداً مخاطر الحرب وتبعاتها المؤلمة على الشعوب، ونعرف أيضاً أن العنف المفرط وقتل المدنيين وإجبار السكان على مغادرة بيوتهم كما يحدث في لبنان هذه الأيام وكما حدث في غزة لعام كامل صار فيه كل مواطنيها من النازحين لمرة ومرتين و5 مرات. أقول نعرف أن هذا العنف المفرط والعشوائي والإجرامي لن يحل الأزمة ولن يجلب السلام أو يحقق الأمن لإسرائيل أو لشعوب المنطقة. لا حل للصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي سوى بمعالجة سببه الأصلي، وهو عدم حصول الفلسطينيين على دولة مستقلة تحقق آمالهم وتطلعاتهم في الاستقلال وتقرير المصير. الصراع سيادة الرئيس لم يبدأ في 7 أكتوبر كما تريد إسرائيل أن تقنع العالم، و7 أكتوبر لم يحدث في فراغ كما قال بحق السكرتير العام لهذه المنظمة التي نقف في رحابها اليوم، وكما عبر بوضوح الرأي الاستشاري لمحكمة العدل الدولية الصادر في 19 يوليو الماضي: الاحتلال هو أصل المشكلة، تفكيك الاحتلال هو بداية الحل. سيادة الرئيس، أمام المجلس مهمة تاريخية. المنطقة العربية قد تشتعل لسنوات إن ترك قادة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من غير حساب ومن دون أي ضغط حقيقي يوقف اندفاعاتهم المتهورة لتحقيق مصالحهم السياسية الداخلية على حساب الشعوب. مصداقية هذا المجلس وهذه المنظمة الأممية على المحك، وليس هناك حدث في عالمنا يمثل تهديداً للأمن والسلم الدوليين أخطر مما نواجهه اليوم في فلسطين ولبنان، وليست هناك جريمة في حق القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني أفدح مما نشهده الآن. لابد أن يرتفع صوت هذا المجلس ليس دفاعا فقط عن الفلسطينيين واللبنانيين الذين يفقدون أرواحهم يوميا من الأطفال والنساء والمدنيين، ولكن دفاعا عن كل معنى تمثله هذه المنظمة الأممية وتحتضنه وتصونه، وعن نظام الأمن الجماعي الذي يمثل جوهر وجودها وأساس عملها ورسالتها. ولطالما عملت الجامعة العربية على نحو لصيق مع الأمم المتحدة، ونرصد اليوم حالة من القبول اليائس والعاجز باستمرار الصراعات في المنطقة. في السودان واليمن ثمة أزمات إنسانية هي الأخطر في العالم نتيجة لحروب مشتعلة وصراعات ممتدة، وبالكاد تلعب الأمم المتحدة دورها في الشؤون الإنسانية مع تراجع ملحوظ في الإرادة للقيام بدور حاسم في الوساطة والخروج بالحلول السياسية الضرورية. أقول أن علينا أن نبث روحا جديدا في عمل المبعوثين الأمميين لهذه النزاعات، وأن تخرج مبادرات مشتركة فعالة ومبدعة للوساطة والحلول الدبلوماسية بالتعاون مع المنظمة الإقليمية وهي الجامعة العربية التي تظهر دائما كل التعاون والتنسيق. ختاما أؤكد أن هذه اللحظة الخطيرة التي تواجهها المنطقة تستدعي الانتباه، لأننا قد نضيع اليوم دون أن ندري أن هذه هي فرصة نادرة لوقف هذا الانسلاق الخطير نحو الكارثة، وهي كارثة لن تقف عند حدود منطقتنا كما تعلمون جميعا. شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abulgate for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Denis Bečirović, Chairman of the Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Respected Chairman, distinguished Excellencies, the modern world is faced with new geopolitical, geoeconomic, geoenergy, security, demographic, and other challenges. We are witnessing the most complex time in the history of human civilization. We live in the most vulnerable period in which a political or some other mistake can lead to a war of catastrophic proportions. The new global challenges of the multipolar reconfiguration of the world require serious responses. It is our duty to fight for peace. We in Bosnia and Herzegovina believe that peace is the highest value and fundamental condition for the progress of humanity. Peace is not just a concept to be understood as the absence of armed conflict. It requires a deeper understanding not only at the international but also at the national level. Let us build a culture of peace together. Without the affirmation and strengthening of the culture of peace, humanity can hardly survive. A culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, and ways of life based on respect for life, promotion of all human rights, promotion non-violence, and respect of the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of states. Where are we today? Have we learned the fundamental lessons of history after the Second World War? Here, at the UN Security Council session, I'm especially warning about the danger of the recently held so-called All Serbs Assembly in Belgrade. The declaration adopted at this pan-ethnic assembly flagrantly threatens the independence and sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as some other countries of Southeast Europe. Also, the declaration of so-called All Serbs Assembly is contrary to international law and represents an extremely dangerous policy with unforeseeable consequences. The establishment of pan-ethnic assemblies is a threat to peaceful and equal cooperation among UN member states. Ladies and gentlemen, let us decide together for the 21st century to be a century of peace rather than a century of new tragedies. Bosnia and Herzegovina survived brutal aggression, genocide, crimes against humanity, and other crimes during the 1990s. That is why my country especially values peace and freedom. Also, Bosnia and Herzegovina is actively contributing to the affirmation of peace and peaceful relations between states. Our message is crystal clear. Instead of renewing great state policies, let's turn to economic development and cooperation. This is our common interest. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bečirović for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. José Maria Pereira Neves, President of the Republic of Cape Verde.
Excelências, tenho a honra de participar neste debate de alto nível, dedicado à liderança para a paz, saudando todos os presentes e agradecendo à presidência eslovena do Conselho de Segurança pela iniciativa e pelo tema escolhido. Vejo três razões que conferem oportunidade ímpar ao debate. O momento que atravessa o mundo, caracterizado por uma instabilidade ameaçadora e potencialmente destruidora para a paz global, a urgência em agregar efetividade ao funcionamento do sistema multilateral na busca de soluções globais e a necessidade de sermos, em cada um dos nossos países, líderes para a paz. O mundo atual caracteriza-se por uma notória ausência de paz e segurança à luz da multiplicação de guerras de agressão, de conflitos intraestatais e de ações de terrorismo. Lá onde não há guerra, verificam-se situações de crise inerentes às tensões governativas, sociais e ambientais que imperam a realização dos direitos humanos e o desenvolvimento. Não há dúvidas de que o multilateralismo tem um papel crucial para conduzir essas guerras e crises a um fim, tendo em vista o retorno à paz. A Carta das Nações Unidas define a essência do multilateralismo quando atribui ao sistema o papel de manter a paz e a segurança no mundo e de realizar a cooperação internacional na solução dos principais problemas de natureza económica, social e humanitária. Por conseguinte, o multilateralismo precisa ser resgatado e reformas políticas são necessárias para reforçar o papel das Nações Unidas na gestão da paz e segurança, dos direitos humanos e do desenvolvimento. A reforma do Conselho de Segurança, abrangendo a expansão dos seus membros, uma representação regional equilibrada, uma melhor complementaridade com a Assembleia Geral e uma menor interferência do direito do veto nas decisões, bem como o reforço da nossa liderança para a paz, assumindo cada um de nós responsabilidade em governar com paz ou preventivamente em prol da paz, devem ser assumidas como prioridades. Em Cabo Verde, acreditamos que os dividendos que resultam da paz são as liberdades, a democracia e o desenvolvimento. Desde o primeiro momento, assumimos a paz como um desígnio nacional. Teremos um mundo melhor se cada um de nós fizer o seu trabalho de casa. Muito obrigado pela vossa atenção.
I thank His Excellency Mr. President from Cabo Verde, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I speak today on behalf of the Nordic countries, so Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Finland. And I'll focus on three aspects of leadership and how leadership should be used to end wars and promote peace in Ukraine, Palestine, Sudan, and beyond. So first is the fundamental importance of national leadership. The implementation of Security Council resolutions hinges upon the efforts of member states. Ultimately, most decisions on war and peace are made at the local level. The UN Charter guides us to resolve international disputes with words instead of weapons. We can mediate or support the mediation efforts of others. For peace in Gaza, we must use our influence towards compliance with international law, a lasting ceasefire, and the release of the remaining hostages. For peace in Ukraine, the aggressor must stop the war, and we must ensure accountability for this blatant violation of the UN Charter by a permanent member of this Council. For peace in Sudan, we must find a path towards restoring democratic governance while meeting the urgent humanitarian needs and ending the atrocious violence against civilians. In all conflicts, irrespective of where they occur, we must call out serious violations of international law and support accountability. Second, it is this very Council that is entrusted with the primary responsibility of international peace and security. The Council is not always delivering what we expect from it. The veto is one part of the shortcoming. The Nordic countries maintain that the veto should be used with utmost restraint, with maximum transparency in strict adherence to the UN Charter. The composition of the Security Council needs addressing. It should better reflect the global realities of the 21st century. Africa's underrepresentation is particularly glaring. Other imbalances should also be rectified. A seat at this horseshoe is, however, not a privilege, but a responsibility to overcome differences rather than blaming others. And third, inclusive leadership is our best chance for lasting peace. Peace cannot be forged among the like-minded or like-sized countries alone. We need dialogue and cooperation. Women must be able to meaningfully participate at all levels in the peace processes. Young people can make a valuable contribution and should be able to do so. After all, conflicts are endangering their lives today as well as their future. Finally, our ultimate aim must be not just to resolve conflicts, but to prevent them. This requires dedicated and inclusive leadership from each and every one of us. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Stubb for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Daniel Risch, Prime Minister of the Principality of Liechtenstein.
Madam President, thank you for your leadership in convening us today. This body and this organization were founded to take us from the age of those who led the world into conflict to one in which leaders work together to bring peace, stability, and development. In Western Europe, we have benefited from the peace dividend for nearly 80 years. The aggression against Ukraine is a painful reminder that we must not take it for granted, and not all in this room seek peace and stability. President, we must see and demand leadership from those in positions of power that is committed to the UN Charter, that upholds the prohibition against illegal war-making by prosecuting those who violate it. Those who are unwilling to respect the Charter demonstrate that they are unfit to lead. We also expect this organization itself to use the power we have collectively placed in its hands. The Secretary General is empowered to lead this organization through difficult moments. Our task as states is to provide the necessary political backing to this end. Earlier this week, in our conversation, I was grateful for the President of the General Assembly's comment that the veto initiative my country initiated is seen as a gift to humanity. We believe it is a symbol of our political backing for action, both by this body and the General Assembly, in support of this organization and those it serves, the people. President, leadership requires us all to speak up where necessary. We are all equally affected by what is decided and what is not decided in this very room. Therefore, we must call for the action that is needed. Leadership means seeing opportunities instead of lamenting crises and looking for ways to act elsewhere if this Council is unable to deliver. But leadership also requires us to listen, especially to those with different experiences and perspectives. We all know that people from my part of the world are overrepresented at this table. In the interest of this Council and our organization, this fact must change. Liechtenstein will continue to work towards a reform council, one where the world is equitably represented, one where those inside the room represent those outside, one where nobody can arbitrarily block the collective will of the membership, and one where more women are in leadership positions, including of the United Nations. President, the United Nations is going through a difficult period, but let's imagine a world without this organization, founded on a vision for living together in peace with respect for each other and for our planet. I agree with Dag Hammarskjöld when he said the United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. But we in this room will have to explain next generations, to our children and grandchildren, why we haven't tried harder to bring our world closer to heaven. Liechtenstein will certainly intensify its political investment in this indispensable organization, and I hope, no, I expect that all of us will do the same. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Risch for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nasser Bourita, Minister for Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation and Moroccan Expatriates of Morocco.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, chère Tania. Je félicite la Slovénie pour sa présidence du Conseil de sécurité pour ce mois de septembre et pour le choix pertinent et important de la thématique de ce débat ouvert. La Charte des Nations Unies a établi l'ordre international à la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, basé sur la primauté du droit, sur l'égalité souveraine de tous les États membres des Nations Unies. Ce document constitue le socle de nos actions et efforts communs, et serait illusoire d'imaginer pour un seul instant une action multilatérale sans le respect de la Charte. La paix et la sécurité internationale sont renforcées lorsque la prééminence de la Charte des Nations Unies est honorée. Cependant, le respect de la Charte ne peut être à géométrie variable et ne saurait faire l'objet d'une approche partielle. La situation indescriptible à Gaza, ayant causé des milliers de morts, principalement des femmes et des enfants, sans parler de nombre de blessés graves et de personnes déplacées, interpelle tous les États membres sur l'utilité et la pertinence de notre charte et de nos mécanismes. L'incapacité du Conseil de sécurité à accomplir sa mission face à des situations de violation grave de la charte est déplorable. L'action d'États membres qui abritent, financent, arment des milices séparatistes pour menacer l'intégrité territoriale d'États voisins constitue une violation grave des principes de la Charte des Nations Unies. Madame la Présidente, l'application asymétrique des principes énoncés dans la Charte remet en cause l'esprit, l'unité et la solidarité qui ont été à l'origine du nouvel ordre mondial après 1945. Les dispositions contenues dans la Charte de l'ONU ne sont pas que des mots et des phrases, ce sont des principes et des valeurs que les États membres sont appelés à respecter de bonne foi. Pour autant, l'opportunité de ce débat constitue une contribution à la réflexion commune sur les voies et moyens pour mettre en diapason notre charte avec les nouvelles réalités et défis multidimensionnels de notre monde. Pour conclure, nous considérons que l'adoption du pacte de l'avenir il y a quelques jours constitue une autre occasion afin que notre action commune puisse être à la hauteur de nos aspirations pour un monde de paix, de prospérité et de respect des valeurs universelles humaines. Je vous remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bourita for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Zurana Deuba, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Nepal.
Thank you, Madam President. I begin by thanking the Presidency of Slovenia for convening this high-level debate. I thank the distinguished briefers for their comprehensive and insightful briefings. Madam President, today we stand at crossroads, and that may be the most perilous time post-Second World War. We witness surge in conflicts, humanitarian crises, and flagrant violations of the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and human rights. The hard-won peace and progress that emerged from the creation of the United Nations are at risk, being threatened by geopolitics and competition. The strength of our leadership is measured by how we unite in the face of adversity. In this context, I would like to highlight a few points. First, rule-based, equitable, and inclusive multilateralism is the only way forward for international peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. With strong political will, we must reinvigorate multilateralism with UN at its center. We must recommit ourselves to the UN Charter and the international laws to guide our actions. Second, as we committed in the Pact for the Future, reforming the United Nations is essential to promote fairness, equality, inclusivity, and justice for all states, whether big or small, powerful or weak, rich or poor. We need a broadly representative, democratic, transparent, and accountable Security Council to enhance the effectiveness and legitimacy of the work of the United Nations. Third, we emphasize unity in the Security Council to resolve existing and prevent potential conflicts by the effective use of diplomacy, mediation, and peacekeeping. Fourth, we must foster partnerships with regional organizations and international financial institutions to support preventive and peace-building efforts, reinforcing the implementation of sustainable development goals would also support this process. In conclusion, leadership requires us to rise above our differences and work towards a common goal, a secure future for all. As we face these daunting challenges, let us embody the principles of unity, respect, and shared responsibility. Together, we can navigate this turbulent landscape and forge a path towards lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Her Excellency, Rana Deuba for her statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Peter Pellegrini, President of the Slovak Republic.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this high-level meeting. Slovakia and Slovenia are often confused by their names. I think that I'm telling the truth when I say that there is no offense taken on either side. On the contrary, our countries and peoples are friends and allies, and there are many more similarities than differences between us. What our nations have in common and truly care about is multilateralism, rule-based order, international law, and of course, peace. Madam President, your country's presidency and your intensive work prove my point. The world we live in isn't always nice, and we see more and longer conflicts. We also see more violence, persecution, and human rights violations, and unfortunately, further backsliding of democracy. We also see an unprecedented number of people displaced or on the run, which multiplies humanitarian needs. And all of this is happening in a world of acute climate change consequences. Sitting here in the UN Security Council brings me to an important question. How can the world's highest body for the prevention of conflicts and advancement of peace fulfill its duties under the UN Charter? How could it lead to peace? We are sorry to see internal conflicts and vetoes instead of peacemaking, unaddressed breaches of international law instead of peacekeeping, and power politics instead of peace-building. The result? It becomes ever harder for member states to trust the Council's ability to address crisis. Moreover, a divided Security Council means more lives lost, more damage done, and more suffering caused. In Slovakia, we see closely where it leads to. Our direct neighbor, Ukraine, has turned into a war-torn country. Although an overwhelming majority of UN members repeatedly denounced Russia's continued aggression. The consequences? I realize this war is not the world's only conflict. There are others in Gaza, Mali, Myanmar, Sudan, and elsewhere. It may also seem too distant for many fellow UN member states, but the consequences extend far beyond Europe. All principles of international cooperation are at stake, principles on which the post-war security architecture has been standing for almost 80 years. Without them, the international order as we know it will end and turn into chaos and acts of violence. For Slovakia, as a long-term and consistent advocate of multilateralism, this is unacceptable. Sovereignty and territorial integrity within internationally recognized borders are supreme principles of international law. They stand at the very basics of the UN Charter. With regret, we see some countries not respecting international organizations like the UN, WTO, or others. For small countries like Slovakia, it is vitally important that these pillars of international order stay in place, so bigger players can't do whatever suits them. Otherwise, such a behavior will lead first to the erosion and eventually to the destruction of multilateralism. Painful lessons from our history teach us that a determined aggressor can be hardly appeased. Everybody fully understands that peace is much more than only the absence of war. That's the reason why the UN Charter entitles a country under armed attack to the right of individual or collective self-defense. We must get back to the basic respect for shared rules and adjust our collective security system. It's the only one that we'll still have. We must not destroy it by our negligence. We can't give up on humanity's most valuable asset, the ability to adapt. It has already been said many times before, but never enough, that peace is one of the UN's main objectives. Unless we start cultivating a culture of peace and non-violence, we will lose both. Unlike most natural disasters, all wars and conflicts are man-made and can be also stopped by people. The UN Charter speaks clearly to us, even over almost 8 decades, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. If we truly believe in that, in what we signed up for, our tasks as leaders is clear. To be able to face the rapid changes of today's world, we all need to recommit to international cooperation and human rights. We should pledge to get back to the very foundations of the UN. They are exactly as up-to-date, relevant, and needed as they were 79 years ago. The UN deserves to enter its next year's 80th anniversary stronger with an outlook of hope and the prospect of renewed will and determination for international cooperation. This is what we promise to the next generation and must not fail to deliver. Let us remember and let us act accordingly. We won't get a second chance. And I know this is a hypothetical exercise, but still it would be very interesting to see how many parties would, with no hesitation, put their signature under a symbolically renewed UN Charter today, as opposed to almost 80 years ago, including all standing commitments and obligations to peace, human rights, and international law, of course. At least an interesting food for thought for the next year's round anniversary of the UN. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Pellegrini for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Irakli Kobakidze, Prime Minister of Georgia.
Thank you very much, Madam President, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I would like to thank the Prime Minister of Slovenia for initiating this very timely debate. At the first session in 1946, the founders promised to unite to maintain global peace and security. As a responsible member of the international community, Georgia actively contributes to global peace. For more than 2 decades, we have made substantial contributions to NATO and the EU-led missions worldwide, making Georgia one of the largest per capita contributors to the NATO missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. 32 brave Georgian soldiers made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan, while hundreds of others suffered injuries in the pursuit of freedom and peace. As we strive for peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all, it's disheartening to witness the ongoing war in Ukraine. We understand the challenges Ukraine currently faces and stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We have sponsored joint and supported more than 600 resolutions, statements, joint statements, and other initiatives by major international organizations and institutions to support Ukraine. The government of Georgia has also been providing substantial humanitarian assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the war, both in the country and to those currently residing in Georgia. Recognizing the value of peace, we have led the effort to transform our immediate South Caucasus region from a conflict zone into one of opportunity, wholeheartedly welcoming the peaceful settlement between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and providing a platform for regional cooperation to foster trust and unity for a shared future. It has been nearly 8 decades since the creation of this organization, and we still struggle to achieve peace. Regrettably, in a world rife with conflicts, rules-based international order is persistently challenged, posing growing risks to peace and stability. Peace and security, along with human rights and development, are the main pillars of the UN's work. Respect for international law and rules-based international order are the foundations for the peaceful, prosperous, and just world, while efficient, more fit-for-purpose global institutions with the UN at its core are crucial to ensure stability, security, respect for human rights, and development globally. Our meeting today should offer a promise for a better future that is very much needed in current turbulent world. Dear colleagues, once again, I would like to emphasize the importance of the Peace Formal Initiative and our support to it. Finally, let me emphasize that only by upholding the principles of the UN Charter and international law, we will be able to fulfill our promise to maintain peace and security, to pave the way for the realization of human rights and sustainable development. Today, more than ever, there is a critical need for a stronger commitment to international principles, effective multilateralism, and accountability. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kobakidze for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Aidros Qasim Abdulaziz Al-Zubidi, Vice President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen.
شكرا لأخ رئيس دولة الرئيس روبرت جلوب رئيس وزراء جمهورية سلوفانيا الصديقة. أصحاب السعادة، أن القيادة من أجل السلام تبدأ من هذه القاعة، وهي بلا شك مسؤولية ومهمة مجلس الأمن، ولكنه في كثير من الأحيان يفتقر إلى الإرادة السياسية اللازمة لتأدية مسؤولياته، وبالتالي تتفاقم الصراعات وتنتشر، وهذا ما يحصل في اليمن. السيد الرئيس، لقد مرت 10 سنوات منذ انطلاق الصراع في بلادنا، فقدنا خلالها مئات الآلاف من الأرواح البريئة، وأصبح الملايين على حافة المجاعة بسبب الإرهاب الحوثي، حيث كانت النساء والأطفال في طليعة هذه المعاناة، بما في ذلك تعرض العاملون في المجال الإنساني والأمم المتحدة للاعتقال والإخفاء القسري، وتزايد نشاط الجماعات الإرهابية بسبب الافتقار إلى الإرادة السياسية الدولية لإنهاء الصراع. إن تداعيات هذه العواقب هو ما نشهده اليوم في البحر الأحمر جراء هجمات الحوثيين ضد الأمن البحري والتجارة الدولية، وهذا نتاج الفشل في إنهاء الصراع وعدم التعامل بجدية مع هكذا ممارسات. إن الوضع الراهن في بلادنا لم يعد مقبولا، وإن مصلحة شعبنا تكمن في إنهاء الصراع وإيجاد حل دائم، وهي مصلحة مشتركة مع حلفائنا الإقليميين والمجتمع الدولي. لقد شرح معالي الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة في قمة المستقبل الحاجة إلى إيجاد حلول مستدامة للصراعات العالمية اليوم، وهي الرؤية التي يجب أن ندعمها جميعا. ومن هذا المنبر أؤكد على حاجتنا إلى نهج جديد شامل لإنهاء الصراع في اليمن وإلى استعادة السلام الذي يستحقه شعبنا. يجب أولا احتواء التهديد الذي يشكله الحوثيون على الأمن العالمي والإقليمي واليمني، وإرسال رسالة واضحة مفادها إنه لا يمكن أن يستمر عنف الاستبداد الحوثي دون عقاب. ثانيا، الحاجة إلى جهد جماعي لتمكين مجلس القيادة الرئاسي من إنهاء العبث والفوضى الذي يمارسه الحوثيون. ثالثا، العمل جميعا لإنهاء المعاناة الإنسانية ومعالجة الأوضاع الاقتصادية المتفاقمة التي يعاني منها شعبنا. هذه الخطوات تخولنا لإيجاد طريق نحو عملية سياسية شاملة بقيادة يمنية ورعاية إقليمية ودولية لضمان حل سياسي مستدام. أصحاب السعادة، لمدة طويلة من تاريخ بلادنا المضطرب تم تهميش القضايا والأطراف التي ينبغي أن تكون هي الأكثر أهمية في تحديد مستقبلا، ويأتي في طليعة ذلك حل قضية شعب الجنوب التي تم الاتفاق على وضع إطار تفاوضي خاصا بها في مشاورات مجلس التعاون الخليجي 2022 في الرياض. وهناك أهمية أيضا لتمثيل أصوات الشباب والنساء والأقليات، حيث لا يمكننا تحقيق سلاما مستدام إلا من خلال عملية سياسية شاملة تضم تلك القضايا والأطراف. وختاما، يتطلب تأمين السلام في بلادنا قيادة فاعلة وتشاركية على المستوى الدولي والإقليمي والمحلي لإيجاد نهج شامل وزخم كافي لإحلال السلام. وأنا على ثقة من أنه يمكن العمل بشكل جماعي من هذه القاعة لتحقيق المستقبل العادل الذي يستحقه شعبنا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Al-Zubidi for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Szijjártó, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary.
Madam Minister, thank you so much. First, I'd like to express our gratitude to the Slovenian government to be so active when it comes to the peace agenda. Now I can be certain that we put our vote on the right place when we voted about the non-permanent members to this term in the Security Council. And your activism is pretty much needed nowadays. We have to look for leadership for peace since we have been living in the age of dangers. And we Hungarians do not need to explain this too much, putting into consideration that we have been living in a neighborhood of a war for the last almost 1,000 days. And we have been confronted with all the consequences of this war, starting from the 1.3 million refugees arriving to Hungary, to the skyrocketing inflation. And nowadays there are still more than 1,000 schools in Hungary where the kids of the refugee families are being enrolled. And if we are honest to ourselves, then I think it's obvious that the answers the global and the European community tried to give to this war did not bring us closer to peace at all. Think about the sanctions. The sanctions are basically more harmful to some European countries than to the Russian economy. And if you are honest to each other, we see that many Western countries and many Western companies are simply evading those sanctions. Or when it comes to the weapon deliveries, did they bring us closer to peace? Obviously not. The increased volume of the weapons on both sides of the front line led to more casualties, more destruction, and definitely a longer war. So I think it's, when we look for leadership for peace, then we have to understand that wars, and especially the one in Ukraine, does and do not have any solution on the battlefield. The solution should come around the negotiating table. And therefore, we argue in favor of ceasefire and argue in favor of peace talks to be started. It was like 2 days after this war has broken out when I called Minister Lavrov and called the head of the presidential administration in Ukraine, Mr. Yermak. And I have offered to both that if they need a place where level playing fields, safety, fairness is guaranteed for peace talks, then Hungary is at their disposal. I have not raised this issue since then, but we have not withdrawn it either, so the offer is still valid. But the problem, Madam Minister, here, when we look for leadership for peace, is that whoever raises or whoever mentions peace in relationship to this war in Ukraine is usually stigmatized and accused and attacked, at least politically, financially, legally, and sometimes physically as well. And we all know the words of which we can pick: puppet, spy, Trojan horse, and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think if you really look for leadership for peace, then we have to put an end to the fact that the word peace is kind of used as a cuss word nowadays by some. So therefore, we have to bring back mutual respect to international politics, and we have to make sure that the definition of diplomacy is not diverted. Currently, many use diplomacy to express something that you only talk to those with whom you agree 100%. No, this is not diplomacy. This is something else. This is not an achievement. Diplomacy is that you talk to everyone. You talk to everyone about complicated issues, even if you do not agree, but you try to understand the other one and try to come to some kind of an agreement. And if you are able to do so, then I think we can find the way and the leadership to peace as well. And I hope we will do so, because we don't want to live the next 1,000 days in the shadow of a war. Thank you so much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Siarto for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Winston Peters, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of New Zealand.
Our thanks to Slovenia for its leadership in organising today's debate, and to the distinguished briefers. Armed conflict is on the rise across the globe. Geostrategic competition and deep distrust are hindering our collective ability to solve a myriad of crises. This is especially true for the Security Council, the primary organ responsible for maintaining international peace and security. New Zealand last sat at this chamber as a Council member almost 10 years ago. Since then, the Council's ability to address urgent global conflicts has been marred by contentious negotiations and a far greater willingness by some permanent members to exercise their veto. New Zealand supports the General Assembly pushing for a more accountable Security Council. This includes examining the motives behind the use of the veto where it obstructs meaningful action. Since the Charter was written 8 decades ago, we have advocated for a council that is effective, results-driven, transparent, and inclusive. As a small state, New Zealand has a strong interest in effective multilateral peace and security arrangements. How then do UN member states, including the Council, lead for peace? First and foremost, any action must start with active defence of the UN Charter and its core principles. After all, the international rule of law and the UN Charter form the foundations of the rules-based international system that underpins our collective security and prosperity. We must also be resolute in our commitment to the peaceful resolution of disputes. All states must refrain from the threat of or use of force against the territorial integrity or sovereignty of any state. Members of the Security Council are no exception. As a founding member, New Zealand remains resolute in our defence of the Charter and in the support of the international judicial institutions that uphold the Charter and international rules. A second core pillar of our efforts must be respect for international humanitarian law and the basic standards of humanity that it protects. Or maybe a third principle: when somebody's addressing you, the rest of the people in the room keep quiet. Madam Chair.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, a second core pillar of our efforts must be respect for international humanitarian law and the basic standards of humanity that it protects. We must be steadfast in bringing to account those who refuse to comply with these most fundamental limits on how war is waged. Third, leading for peace requires investment in not only humanitarian action, but also peace building and sustainable development. The UN and its agencies play critical roles in conflict prevention, mediation, peacekeeping, and humanitarian support. But the UN system cannot succeed without the committed backing of member states in leading for peace. Finally, we must also recommit to diplomacy as the very building block of better relations between states. We must engage in good faith to find solutions to seemingly intractable problems. We look forward to working alongside you in pursuit of these goals and a more peaceful world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Peters, for his statement. And I really ask for the silence in the room. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. J. Udo Singabao, Senior Vice President and Minister of Justice of the Republic of Palau.
Madam President, Excellencies and colleagues, we thank the Permanent Mission of Slovenia for convening this very important discussion. Climate change is the single greatest threat to international peace and security. Sea level rise, ocean acidification, saltwater intrusion, loss of essential fishing sources, and infrastructure destruction brought by increasingly devastating tropical storms threaten the livelihoods of the people of Palau and of most other island nations. As climate change impacts increase, so does food and water insecurity, forced migration and displacement, infrastructure damage, and loss of our natural environment. These are all effects we usually associate with war zones. But for SIDS, these threats to our state of peace arise from the effects of climate change. Our people are 15 times more likely to die from a climate-related impact than the rest of the globe, and we bear the brunt of the climate consequences. We recognize the important role the Security Council can play in achieving peace and security in our home of Palau and other small island states. To restore credibility to the Charter, it is crucial that the Council take a look at all issues threatening international peace and security. We need an all-encompassing definition of peace and security, a definition that includes and recognizes how climate change threatens peace and security by forcing people from their ancestral homes, diminishing food supplies and potable water, destroying homes, agriculture, and vital community buildings. Addressing climate change effects is no less important than armed conflict. Palau reiterates our call for a special representative of the Secretary General on climate change and security. And we continue to urge this body to focus on the disproportionate threat that climate change imposes on the peace and security of small island developing states like Palau. I thank you for convening this open debate. All people have the right to peace, security, and freedom. And to work to assure this freedom, we call on the Council to fully recognize climate change threats to the peace and security of millions. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Singabao for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castejón, Prime Minister of Spain.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Excelencias, en 1945, medio centenar de países firmaron la Carta de Naciones Unidas para preservar a las generaciones venideras del flagelo de la guerra. Los miembros de la nueva organización confirieron al Consejo de Seguridad la responsabilidad de mantener la paz y la seguridad internacional. Y así fue. Esas generaciones venideras de las que hablaba el preámbulo de la Carta disfrutaron de un mundo más pacífico del que vivieron sus padres. Desgraciadamente, esa autoridad se resquebraja. Los conflictos de hoy ponen a prueba la coherencia de los miembros del Consejo. Las resoluciones de este órgano no se aplican. El uso del veto resulta una constante de bloqueo y uno de sus miembros permanentes viola de manera flagrante la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, invadiendo injustificada e ilegalmente otro país. Y ante esta situación es fundamental que reaccionemos y para ello España propone 3 principios de actuación. En primer lugar, la coherencia. La aplicación del derecho internacional no puede ser ni selectiva ni estar condicionada por intereses políticos o estratégicos. El mínimo de humanidad que representa el derecho internacional humanitario no debería ser cuestionado y por eso debemos condenar igualmente las violaciones del derecho internacional, ya sucedan en Ucrania, en Gaza o en Sudán. Junto con la coherencia, debemos impulsar la reforma. Necesitamos transformar el sistema, conservando lo que funciona, que es mucho, y reformando lo que ha quedado obsoleto. El Consejo de Seguridad necesita cambiar para adaptarse a la actualidad y ganar en operatividad. Y España, como parte del grupo de Unidos por el Consenso, defiende que el Consejo de Seguridad sea ampliado con miembros no permanentes y, lógicamente, abolir el veto. Mientras ese veto se mantenga, apoyaremos todas las iniciativas contundentes a la limitación de su uso. Y, finalmente, la responsabilidad. Porque la actual crisis de confianza requiere el liderazgo responsable de los miembros presentes y futuros del Consejo en todos los ámbitos, incluyendo el cumplimiento de la agenda multilateral que todos los países aprobamos. Agenda 2030, el Acuerdo de París, la Declaración de los Derechos Humanos, por mencionar alguno de esos ejemplos. Acabamos de aprobar un pacto muy importante, esperanzador, que es el Pacto del Futuro, con un compromiso de reforzar entre todos el multilateralismo para las generaciones venideras. Honremos ese compromiso con un Consejo de Seguridad coherente, reformado y responsable. Gracias.
His Excellency Mr. Sanchez Perez Castellón for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Luís Montenegro, Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic.
Senhora Presidente, muito obrigado e os meus cumprimentos a todos. Quero, em primeiro lugar, felicitar a Eslovénia pela promoção desta reflexão muito oportuna sobre a liderança para a paz sob a forma de debate aberto. De acordo com vários relatórios e indicadores, os últimos 3 anos foram os mais violentos das últimas 3 décadas. Num momento de forte crescimento de tensões geopolíticas e de conflitos, o trabalho do Conselho de Segurança é mais necessário do que nunca. É para ele que o mundo se vira para fazer face às ameaças à paz e à segurança internacionais, antes mesmo que estas se transformem em conflitos e em violência. Porém, este Conselho encontra-se frequentemente paralisado, em face de graves violações do direito internacional, ataques contra civis e tragédias humanitárias de enormes proporções. O cenário mais evidente deste impasse é o aumento do uso indiscriminado do direito de veto. A Carta prevê, no artigo 27, uma abordagem de boa-fé, em que as partes em litígio deverão abster-se de votar. Mas, ao longo dos anos, temos vindo a assistir a um aumento do uso do veto, bem como a situações em que membros do Conselho se tornam parte de um conflito, sendo simultaneamente juiz e jurado. Este é um claro sinal de bloqueio atual do Conselho e da sua dificuldade em garantir a estabilidade e a paz em nome de todos os povos das Nações Unidas. Enquanto a guerra prossegue, com consequências terríveis dentro e fora da Ucrânia, o Conselho de Segurança tem estado muitas vezes em silêncio. Em relação a Gaza, pouco diz e sempre demasiado tarde. Esperemos que agora, na situação do Líbano, o Conselho de Segurança possa ser ativo e consequente nos esforços de contenção que evitem uma escalada de violência. Mesmo quando resoluções são aprovadas, frequentemente ficam por cumprir. É imprescindível que, de Gaza ao Sudão, todas as partes façam o que estiver ao seu alcance para assegurar a plena implementação das resoluções adotadas por este Conselho. Senhora Presidente, é prioritário que o Conselho de Segurança tenha uma agenda orientada para soluções. Não é uma tarefa fácil, mas é urgente e é essencial restaurar a confiança e a esperança no multilateralismo. É essa a visão do Secretário-Geral e que foi agora assumida na nova Agenda para a Paz e na recente Cimeira do Futuro. Creio que o caminho passa por 4 aspectos fundamentais. Em primeiro lugar, uma abordagem preventiva. Prevenção significa agir. Agir antes da escalada de tensão. O Conselho deve fazer uso de todos os instrumentos da sua caixa de ferramentas, como é o caso da mediação e do apoio dos seus órgãos subsidiários, caso da Comissão para a Consolidação da Paz. Uma arquitetura operacional de paz abrangente e inclusiva, que engloba a prevenção, a manutenção e a consolidação da paz, com mandatos realistas, com objetivos e calendários claros, poderá adaptar-se melhor às diferentes fases daquilo que são os caminhos de paz. Em segundo lugar, o trabalho para as organizações regionais. Neste espírito, apoiamos a implementação da Resolução 2719 sobre o financiamento das operações de apoio à paz lideradas pela União Africana. Trabalhar com organizações regionais cumpre o espírito da Carta, complementando e reforçando o trabalho do Conselho por via de soluções mais próximas das pessoas afetadas. Em terceiro lugar, a questão mais ampla dos métodos de trabalho do Conselho de Segurança, incluindo apelos à restrição do uso do veto. O amplo apoio à Declaração Política Franco-Mexicana e ao Código de Conduta do ACT, Accountability, Coherence and Transparency, bem como a implementação da iniciativa do veto, evidenciam um consenso crescente sobre a necessidade de restringir o uso do veto no estrito respeito pela Carta. O direito de veto, à semelhança da assunção de um lugar à mesa do Conselho de Segurança, antes de constituir um privilégio, representa uma responsabilidade e é assim que deve ser exercido. É também necessário reforçar a responsabilização deste órgão perante a Assembleia Geral e a comunidade internacional. Por último, mas não menos importante, os 10 membros eleitos deste Conselho têm um papel crucial a desempenhar. Trabalhando em conjunto, podem constituir uma alternativa e apontar um caminho de soluções. Os membros eleitos revestem-se de uma legitimidade interregional que permite ultrapassar confrontos entre poderes instituídos. É nisto que acreditamos. Portugal continuará a trabalhar para restaurar a credibilidade, a relevância e a eficácia deste Conselho, numa altura em que o seu papel é mais necessário do que nunca, sempre com a Carta das Nações Unidas como bússola orientadora. É neste espírito que Portugal é candidato a um mandato neste Conselho para o biênio 2027-2028. Muito obrigado a todos pela vossa atenção e muito obrigado, Sra. Presidente.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Montenegro for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency General J.J. Odongo Abubakar, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uganda.
Madam President, I am honored to speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement. I wish to congratulate the Republic of Slovenia on its accession to the Presidency of the Security Council for the month of September and express appreciation for granting NAM the opportunity to present its position on today's topic. Madam President, the concept of leadership for peace is at the center of the Non-Aligned Movement. NAM member countries are committed to supporting, preserving, and strengthening the values of peace, multilateralism, and international cooperation as cornerstones of the Charter of the United Nations. We reaffirm our commitment to the United Nations as the primary multilateral institution with mechanisms to promote and support the intertwined values of humanity, namely peace, security, development, inalienable human rights, and mechanisms for the achievement of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. At the 19th summit held in Kampala in January this year, the heads of state and government reaffirmed the validity of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles and norms of international law as indispensable in preserving and promoting peace and security, the rule of law, economic development, and social progress, and all human rights for all. NAM is cognizant of the importance of building representative, democratic, and inclusive global institutions that serve the interests of all. In this respect, the movement stresses the need to strengthen multilateralism through a comprehensive reform of the current global governance architecture, including the United United Nations system, the international financial institutions, and the multilateral development banks. The movement reaffirms its opposition to all unilateral coercive measures, including those measures used as tools for political or economic and financial pressure against any country, in particular against developing countries, which violates the Charter of the United Nations, the rules and principles of international law. We reaffirm that under no circumstances should people be deprived of their own means of sustenance and development. We further express our concern at the continued imposition of such measures which hinder the well-being of populations of the affected countries and create obstacles to the full realization of their full human rights. We reiterate that there is need to strengthen the United Nations as the primary multilateral organization, providing it with the substantive capacity to fully and effectively meet the purposes and principles enshrined in its charter, and at consolidating its democratic and intergovernmental character, in particular through the revitalization of the General Assembly and strengthening its authority as a democratic, inclusive, equitable, and representative body of the organization, as well as expediting reform of the United Nations Security Council in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 62/557 in a comprehensive and integrated manner in order to make the Security Council a more democratic, effective, transparent, and representative organ of the United Nations. Madam President, the NAM movement reaffirms and underscores its position and commitment with regard to multilateral cooperation for just, democratic world, for the promotion of the principle of pacific settlement of disputes in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, in accordance with international law and the United Nations resolutions, including those resolutions of this very Council. In that context, we emphasize the significant role played by International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, in promoting and encouraging settlement of international disputes by peaceful means in accordance with the relevant provisions of this charter and the statute of the court. The movement remains committed to its founding principles and reaffirms its determination to work for the establishment of a peaceful, just, equitable world order with shared global affluence. Furthermore, NAM member states renewed their determination to work for a multipolar world through the reform and strengthening of the United Nations and multilateral processes, which contribute to a better world and a secure future for all. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency General Abu Bakr for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ratu William Maivalili Katonevier, President of the Republic of Fiji.
President of the United Nations Security Council, Excellencies, I congratulate the government of Slovenia for its leadership and for convening these important discussions today. In 1970, when Fiji joined the United Nations, we recognized the significance of multilateralism and that by virtue of our membership. Fiji has contributed immensely towards a peaceful and safer world. Testament to these are Fiji's extensive contribution to UN peacekeeping operations, which remains a cornerstone of our foreign policy since our first peacekeeping mission in 1978. Since then, till today, Fiji has contributed the highest number of UN peacekeepers per capita than any other country. Aligning with the theme of this year's International Day of Peace, Fiji calls for the inculcating of the culture of peace from the grassroots of society into religious communities and learning institutions and to our communities as a whole. We urge the United Nations to play a proactive role in this endeavor, not only responding to conflicts, but in building and reinforcing a culture of peace. The United Nations Security Council, which has a primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, has remained almost unchanged. However, the security landscape has vastly evolved with new and emerging threats and crises. The Council's effectiveness and representativeness are important. Fiji calls for a more inclusive Security Council that ensures a permanent seat for small island developing states. Madam President, the concept of peace resonates with us in the Blue Pacific in its relevance and urgency. In appreciation of the value of peacekeeping, effort towards establishment of a Pacific cooperation network in the field of peacekeeping, a joint effort with a light coordination mechanism in the United Nations Department of Peace Operations is underway. Regional policies, including the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific, the 2018 Bold Declaration on Regional Security, and other highlight Pacific leaders' vision on a region of peace. With the vision of being an ocean of peace, the region is undertaking efforts embedded in peace as a cornerstone of future policies and strategies. International collaboration can help refine and strengthen current efforts, ensuring that it serves not only the Pacific, but contributes to peace and security worldwide. In closing, while keeping with the theme of today's dialogue, Fiji reiterates the importance of the three pillars of the UN Charter and the return to the principles of the Charter to help us collectively navigate a complex peace and security landscape that guarantees a safe and sustainable future for all. Madam President, I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Katuniver for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Filip Ivanovic, Deputy Prime Minister of Montenegro.
Dear Madam President, distinguished colleagues, allow me first to thank Slovenia for convening this open debate, as well as briefers for their insightful remarks. Montenegro aligns itself with the statement of the European Union and wishes to add the following in a national capacity. Today, in a time of highest number of escalating conflicts since the Cold War, international legal order and multilateralism are on the test. We continue to witness polarization among UN member states that highly impacts the work of the UN Security Council and alarming disrespect of international humanitarian law, including human rights, and consequently the erosion of trust in international institutions. We are seeing severe civilian harm from Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, DRC to Sahel that has caused unprecedented casualties and suffering, as well as the high risk of famine. Excellencies, dear colleagues, states cannot be above the law, the UN Charter, or legally binding UN Security Council resolutions. In this regard, Montenegro reiterates calls of other member states addressed to the Security Council's permanent members to refrain from using the veto for actions that could prevent or stop violence worldwide. This is precisely why states must work together to rebuild trust in the UN Security Council as the main organ to maintain the international peace and security. Nevertheless, Montenegro strongly believes that UN-centric, rule-based system is a precondition for long-lasting peace and development. Today's meeting, which we consider both timely and essential, is another opportunity to recommit to the UN Charter and multilateralism for ensuring more just, democratic, and sustainable world order. The way forward is based only through mutual respect, trust, and consensus. Montenegro values the work of the UN peace-building architecture on prevention of violence and conflicts, and strongly supports the promotion of international cooperation and the respect of the UN Charter as a cornerstone of the rule of law at the international level. We welcome all peaceful resolutions, including negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitrary, etc. We also commend the UN Secretary General's new agenda for peace and look forward to deepening our discussions on the future of peacekeeping in the context of the next ministerial meeting to be held in Germany in 2025. In current geopolitical situation, contested and complex, it is vitally important to work together on the Security Council's credibility and relevance. Another crucial step is to increase trust within nations, to find common grounds and enhance international cooperation. We firmly support the Council's close cooperation with regional organizations in order to maintain peace and security. Dear colleagues, peace is our most precious value and we strive for it, the most valuable legacy for succeeding generations. To accomplish this common goal and fulfill the promise to the future generations, Member States must uphold the values and objectives of the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ivanovic for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Fernandez, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico.
Gracias, señora presidenta. El tema liderazgo para la paz es pertinente y necesario en esta semana de alto nivel. Qué mejor momento para analizar la forma en la que el Consejo de Seguridad encaja en el nuevo impulso al multilateralismo que acabamos de acordar en el Pacto del Futuro. En décadas pasadas, la comunidad internacional volteaba los ojos al Consejo de Seguridad cuando estallaba algún conflicto. Ahora, muchos acuerdos de paz o ceses al fuego se forjan en ámbitos lejanos a las Naciones Unidas. Los reacomodos geopolíticos e ideológicos dominan hoy el salón del Consejo de Seguridad. El uso frecuente del veto no ha hecho más que dañar la imagen de este órgano y la reputación de aquellos países que considerábamos líderes en algún momento. Es claro que en conflictos tan apremiantes como los de Ucrania, Gaza y Sudán, el Consejo de Seguridad se ha quedado muy atrás. Esta situación ha generado que actores independientes a las Naciones Unidas sean los que asuman cada vez más el liderazgo. Claramente, el mundo no puede quedarse con los brazos cruzados y ejemplo no nos faltan de países y organizaciones regionales que movilizan sus recursos para mediar acuerdos. Por ejemplo, Qatar y Egipto han sido instrumentales en promover un cese al fuego en Gaza. El secretario general de la ONU y Turquía lograron la histórica iniciativa de granos del Mar Negro. Como país convencido del multilateralismo y el papel preponderante de las Naciones Unidas, México propone 4 puntos para reforzar liderazgos efectivos. Primero, seamos eficientes y vayamos a la sustancia de las crisis. Dejemos atrás discursos retóricos y repetitivos en las sesiones de este Consejo. 2, hagamos mayor uso de las organizaciones regionales como la Unión Africana. 3, una vez más, apelemos a los miembros permanentes de este Consejo para que limiten el uso del veto y dejen de imponer consideraciones meramente nacionales por encima del bien colectivo. Y cuarto, reforcemos las facultades de la Asamblea General, a la cual también le competen la paz y la seguridad internacionales. Hacemos votos para que los resultados de la Cumbre del Futuro se traduzcan en verdaderos compromisos colectivos para revitalizar el papel de las Naciones Unidas. Transformemos esos ideales en acción y mostremos al mundo que el Consejo de Seguridad tiene liderazgo para la paz. Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hernandez Garcia for his statement. I now give the floor to His Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي رئيس مجلس الأمن، رئيس وزراء سلوفينيا، السيد روبرت، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أود بداية أن أشكر سلوفينيا على الدعوة لعقد هذه الجلسة وأن أثني على موقفها الداعمة لجهود ترسيخ السلم والأمن الدوليين وتحديدا مشاركتها الإجماع الدولي واعترافها التاريخي بدولة فلسطين. يأتي اجتماعنا في فترة تتصاعد فيها وتيرة الصراعات والأزمات مع تضاؤل أفق حلها وتضاعف التحديات والتهديدات المشتركة مع تفاوت الأولويات حيالها، وتتنامى أزمة الثقة في النظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف وقدرته على تحقيق آمال الشعوب بمستقبل يسوده السلام والتنمية. تحتم علينا هذه الظروف تقييم حالة عمل الدولي متعدد الأطراف وأسباب تراجعه عن حل الأزمات ومعالجة التحديات المشتركة، ولعل النظر الجاد بالإسراع في عملية إصلاح مجلس الأمن أصبح ضرورة ملحة أكثر من أي وقت مضى. ونؤكد بأن استعادة الاحترام للمواثيق والأعراف الدولية يأتي بتطبيق القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني ومحاسبة منتهكيه دون انتقائية. وبالنظر إلى الأزمات المستعصية والصراعات الأزلية، فإن التحدي لا ينحصر في عجز منظومة السلم والأمن والمؤسسات الدولية عن الاستجابة لها، بل يتعداه ليشمل غياب القيادة من أجل السلام، لأن صناعة السلام تتطلب الشجاعة في اتخاذ القرارات الصعبة. فخلف كل تعطيل لمسارات السلام والتسويات السياسية نجد بعض القيادات السياسية تغلب مصالحها الشخصية واعتباراتها الحزبية على المصالح الجامعة والسلم الإقليمي والدولي، والذي انعكس بشكل واضح على كفاءة المنظمات الدولية ومجلس الأمن على وجه الخصوص في أداء مهامها. ولعلنا نجد في غياب التحرك الدولي الجاد لإيقاف التصعيد العسكري والإسرائيلي المستمر خير دليل على ما يعانيه النظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف من قصور وتضعضع في الإرادة السياسية الدولية. تؤمن المملكة بأن السلام هو الأساس الذي يمهد للتعاون والتنمية، وهو الحامي لديمومتها، والخروج من دائرة العنف والأزمات يجب علينا تمكين القيادة الدولية المسؤولة وإحباط محاولات تصدير المصالح السياسية ضيقة على حساب أمن الشعوب وتعايشها. وستظل المملكة داعمة للنظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف وساعية لتطويره وتمكين مقاصده واستعادة الثقة بمؤسساته، وهي ملتزمة بتعزيز العمل الجماعي من أجل تحقيق الأمن والتنمية المشتركة. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank His Highness Prince Faisal for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Pakistan congratulates Slovenia for convening the Security Council to discuss leadership for peace. Proliferating wars in the Middle East, Europe and elsewhere, great power tensions and growing poverty are threatening the foundations of the world order. Last Sunday, we approved the Pact for the Future. We must give life to our commitments, else the future will be bleak and dangerous. First, we must compel Israel to halt its genocidal war in Gaza and prevent its attempt to provoke a wider conflict in the Middle East. Bombing in Beirut is most condemnable. It is time to apply sanctions against Israel, including an arms and trade embargo. It is time to hold its leadership accountable for its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Security Council, Madam President, must develop an impartial plan for a ceasefire and peaceful solution for the war in Ukraine, and not allow its perpetuation or escalation. The Council can no longer ignore the festering Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It poses an ever-present ominous threat to international peace and security. The Council must call for a halt to the massive violations of the fundamental rights of the Kashmiri people and implement its own resolution that demand a plebiscite for self-determination in Kashmir Valley. The Council should effectively address the resurgence of the threat of terrorism from Afghanistan, especially from Daesh, ISIL-K, and the Fitna al-Khawarij. The Council must extend active support to the African countries and the African Union to defeat terrorism and foreign intervention. UN peacekeeping must become more robust and effective. The Council should initiate confidence-building measures to prevent a war between the major powers and ease the rising tension, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. Healthy competition between governments is very healthy and good, but must not take the shape of ugly confrontation. The Council must declare zero tolerance for the illegal use of force and revive global efforts to halt and reverse the new arms race in nuclear and conventional weapons. It must build controls over new weapons and technologies, including artificial intelligence, that are making war more likely and more lethal. Madam President, in cooperation with other member states, Pakistan shall pursue these objectives in the Security Council when it assumes its seat in the Council next year. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Sharif for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia.
Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of Estonia and Lithuania. I address this esteemed gathering today with a heavy heart. The promise of peace, enshrined in the very foundation of this organization, remains distant for too many. Entire regions are devastated by conflict, climate crisis, deepening inequalities, and rising extremism, leaving millions displaced and communities shattered. Without the effective UN challenges, mount and chaos spreads. For decades, we have entrusted the Union nations to provide a layer of protection the world needs. Yet the realities expose the limitations of its current structures. This failure is painfully evident in Ukraine, where a permanent member of this Council is flagrantly and repeatedly violated international law, including the deliberately targeting civilians and critical infrastructure. Russia sits at this table while engaging in arms deals with Iran and North Korea that defy the Council's own resolutions and abuses its veto privilege to evade any accountability. The international community's response to Russia's aggression, as well as to all acts of terror and war, will define our collective future. It should be the concern of the international community if we allow the powerful to act with impunity. After this, who can feel safe and secure? Distinguished colleagues, we need a Security Council that is effective in addressing the key challenges of the 21st century, whether conflict and security, climate change, cybersecurity, or global inequality. There are steps we must take to fulfill the main responsibility and accountability of a Security Council to maintain international peace and security. Let us start by enforcing all provisions of the Charter, while the aggressor is voting on resolutions regarding the aggression they are part of. We must improve the working methods of the Security Council, and the veto power should be limited. We strongly back the French-Mexican initiative on veto restraint and the Code of Conduct by the Accountability, Coherence, and Transparency Group. The veto initiative is good. We now need to discuss how we can take it further and strengthen the role of a General Assembly. Excellencies, we all just pledged at the Summit of the Future to work in solidarity to prepare for forever there is to come and to build a better future. Our vision for this is clear: a united nation where the principles of peace, sovereignty, and human rights are not merely words, but guiding forces. Our task is to take this organization to where it must be, at the core of providing the international stability and security. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Karis for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gregor Közler, Vice Minister for European and International Affairs of Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed Mr. Minister Fajon, dear neighbor Slovenia, for convening this high-level open debate. I thank the Secretary General for his insightful statement and the briefers for their valuable contributions. Excellencies, maintaining peace and security is at the heart of the United Nations. It is why we all signed and ratified the UN Charter. We committed ourselves to upholding international law and resolving conflicts peacefully. Yet the world today tells a different story. Russia's unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine has been a cruel wake-up call, not only in Europe, and has brought unspeakable human suffering to Ukraine and its people. There are many other conflicts in the world, from the Middle East and the devastating humanitarian situation in Gaza, most recently also in Lebanon, to Sudan, Haiti, and Myanmar, to name only the most atrocious conflicts. At the same time, transnational challenges like climate change, hunger, and global health crises multiply these existing threats to peace and stability. Faced with these realities now more than ever, and in the spirit of the Summit of the Future, we need collective leadership, genuine collective leadership. Let me highlight 4 areas. First, we must restore trust in the multilateral system and thereby protect its relevance. We risk its irrelevance. For this, we need meaningful reform, starting with the Security Council itself. With this organ, Austria is honored to have been, together with Kuwait, co-chair in the person of our Perm Rep Axel Maschik of the intergovernmental negotiations on the Security Council reform. We are encouraged by the progress made, especially by the adoption of 3 ambitious actions on reform that the Summit of the Future held this week. The vision set out in the text is clear. Leaders have committed to ensuring greater representation for underrepresented and underrepresented regions, groups, and redress the historical injustice, especially against Africa. We all and they want to see a more effective council where the question of the veto will be key. We have committed ourselves to working towards a consolidated model, thereby moving the reform process to the next phase. Second, we need to ensure a swift and decisive response of the Security Council whenever humanitarian or international law as such is violated. Without such a response and accountability, impunity reigns and the cycle of violence perpetuates. We must establish and implement clear mechanisms to hold violators accountable. Third, we need a more networked system of global governance. Effective partnerships are essential in this context, whether among UN agencies or between regional organizations and the Security Council, and as a new member state, may I say, the cooperation between the European Union and its missions worldwide and the African Union and its missions with the UN is essential for such a networked partnership in this context. A collaborative, integrated approach is essential to strengthen our collective ability to prevent conflicts and sustain peace. Finally, we need more dialogue. Today's world is highly complex. There are no simple solutions, but dialogue is the linchpin of an effective multilateralism. It may not always lead to immediate resolution of conflicts, but it fosters mutual understanding and lays the groundwork for lasting peace. Very often we see that conflicts persist because parties lack the will to engage in genuine dialogue, in real dialogue, not just in phrases. But this lack of will comes at a tremendous cost. The lives of innocent humans, the degradation of our environment, and as such risking the future of our planet. As a small, militarily neutral country, but never politically neutral when it comes to violations of international law, Austria knows that an effective multilateral system is our only protective shield, our real only protective shield against a world where might makes right. This is why Austria is running for the Security Council for the term of 2027 and 28. But this is only part of our very broad multilateral DNA and understanding, because we are a seat country of the United Nations. with Vienna of one of the seats. And we're determined to continue to help create space for genuine dialogue, also in the most difficult situations, in the spirit of mutual trust and meaningful partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, a space where leadership is defined by its commitment to peace, not by seeking power for its own sake. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kisler for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nicol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia.
Thank you very much, distinguished attendees. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to Slovenia for organizing this open debate. The global security crisis has undermined the multilateral system. We continue to witness a growing number of conflicts and crises with a heavy toll on the civilian population, including the most vulnerable. The United Nations must be resilient to the attempts to create a situation when the use of force in interstate relations, acts of aggression, and gross violations of human rights and international humanitarian law are considered normal. As the theme of today's discussion is leadership for peace, I want to share my belief that indeed peace requires leadership and sincere political courage. I and my government are dedicated to closing the chapter of conflict in our region and transforming the dynamics into cooperation for prosperity, stability, and peace. Armenia stands ready to sign the peace agreement with Azerbaijan. The Armenian side has proposed to sign already agreed articles of the peace treaty before the COP29 in Baku, thus creating a conducive environment to move forward the peace process. The Crossroads of Peace initiative of Armenia aims at unlocking the economic potential of the region and strengthening economic and cultural ties, thus contributing to the political dialogue and achievement of a comprehensive peace for the benefit of all peoples. We stand ready to use the positive momentum and continue the border delimitation process on the basis of the agreement between our border delimitation commissions based on the Almaty Declaration of 1991. A strong and unequivocal support by the United Nations to the efforts of Armenia to achieve just and durable peace in the region is crucial. Thank you for your attention.
His Excellency Mr. Pashinyan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ivan Kondo, Caretaker Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement to be delivered on behalf of the EU, and I would like to highlight some additional points. At the outset, let me express our appreciation to Slovenia for convening this momentous high-level open debate. I would also like to thank the briefers for their insightful presentations and assessments of the trends on the ground. This debate is held at a critical moment. Building upon our commitment to strengthen multilateralism, we have adopted at the beginning of this week the Pact on the Future. The upcoming Peace-Building Architecture Review in 2025 will provide us with another opportunity to further improve the global security framework. As many of the previous speakers today have already outlined, we are observing a worrying trend with the number of conflicts around the world increasing and the respect for the norms and the principles of the UN Charter declining. The most effective way to address this trend is by building trust and strengthening leadership, defending the values of democracy and human rights, and implementing Security Council resolutions and decisions of the international courts. It has been 2.5 years since a permanent member of the Security Council unleashed a war of aggression against its neighboring country, violating the principles of the UN Charter and the international law.
It is indispensable that Russia withdraws from Ukraine and stops the war so that mutual trust and confidence in international rules-based order can be restored. In the face of ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Sudan, the UN Security Council must restore its credibility as the global body responsible for peace and security. These conflicts, while different in nature, demand a consistent response from the international community, namely swift actions and genuine commitment to achieving lasting peace. The effectiveness and accountability of the United Nations Security Council should be strengthened by enhancing the transparency and accountability of its work. With this in mind, Bulgaria took its decision to be among the initial co-sponsors of the United Nations General Assembly resolution known as the Veto Initiative. Next, I would like to further emphasize the crucial role of the elected members of the Security Council for strengthening multilateralism and increasing its effectiveness. They are uniquely positioned to foster unity, serve as a bridge builders, and make the multilateralism deliver for all. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm Bulgaria's commitment to the norms and principles of the international law, including human rights and international humanitarian law, and commitment of my country to multilateralism as the best investment in strengthening and upholding national sovereignty. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Konda for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Retno Lestari Priyanasari Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Madam President, we are here to speak about the leadership for peace. But peace is nowhere to be found for the people of Palestine. When 41,000 Palestinians are killed, millions displaced, and all access for humanitarian operation closed, the very essence of our common humanity is questioned. They are symptoms of failed leadership for peace. There won't be peace also if there is no respect to sovereignty and territorial integrity. All eyes on the Council to revive this longest-standing conflict once and for all. Today, an all-out war is at risk in Lebanon. At the same time, we have the UNIFIL peacekeepers. If we cannot enforce UNSC mandate's tool to maintain peace, what remains of Council leadership for peace? Therefore, restoring credibility and trust to the Council is our priority. Council reform is paramount to ensure leadership for peace. I would like to underline two key points. First, strive for a more democratic leadership for peace. There is no greater urgency now than to establish immediate peace in Gaza. We must not let conflict escalation in the region, such as what is happening in Lebanon, reach a point of no return. Cold War mindset must be avoided as realities have changed. Indonesia calls for a more democratic mechanism for effective decision-making to avoid inaction in the face of grave threat to international peace and security. Second, ensure inclusivity and synergy on decision-making for peace. This Council must allow for more voices and wider action to be accommodated for peace. Strengthened and inclusive cooperation must be forged between the Council, UN bodies, and regional organizations. A better proportion of underrepresented regions and developing countries is also needed to ensure that all hands are on deck when world peace is at stake. Without inclusivity, peace will never be attained in entirety. Madam President, we do not need to search far and wide to pursue a secure future. We can start right here and right now with peace for the people of Palestine. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Mrs. Marsudi for her statement. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Tauhid Hussain, Advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the interim government of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies and distinguished briefers. I thank the Slovenian presidency for organizing this timely debate. The debate holds particular significance for Bangladesh. In recent months, our people witnessed an upheaval. Led by students, people at large demonstrated remarkable courage and conviction against tyrannical governance. We are now on course for transformation. This transition resonates deeply with today's discussion on the need for a renewed leadership for peace. Let me reflect on the guiding questions for today's debate. First, to address the alarming erosion of respect for the UN Charter, we must rekindle the values enshrined in it. It is not a matter of choice. The global system of collective security is increasingly under strain due to blatant disregard for international norms. The Council must reinforce accountability, address inequality, and ensure that violations of international law are met with firm responses without exception. The Security Council needs to be reformed to make it more representative and effective in addressing both the conventional and emerging security threats. Secondly, UN Security Council needs to do better in restoring credibility and relevance in protracted conflicts such as Myanmar, Gaza, or Ukraine. The situation in Myanmar and more recently in Gaza and Lebanon are instances of Council's failure to fulfill its foremost duty to protect the civilians and address the root cause of armed conflict. As the Council is aware, Bangladesh has been hosting over 1.2 million Rohingyas who fled their homes in the face of gruesome atrocities. Over the past 1 month, another 20,000 plus Rohingyas entered our territory as the conflict in the Rakhine state of Myanmar intensified. Unfortunately, our capacity is simply overstretched. This Council can no longer remain indifferent to the question and let the civilians suffer most agonizingly. We must prioritize political solutions in Myanmar and promote an inclusive and sustainable peace process. The Council has to remain seized on the situation in Myanmar through periodic briefings. Regional actors need to be engaged too in addressing the root causes of conflict in Myanmar, be political or socio-economic. Third, the elected members should shoulder responsibility to build consensus on critical issues before the Council. They have to bridge divides and act as honest brokers, ensuring that the voices of smaller nations and developing countries are not lost in the complex geopolitical calculus. When the elected members lead by example, by promoting dialogue, transparency, and compromise, the Council gets to effective action on the ground. Fourth, engaging the regional organizations. Regional organizations are increasingly crucial partners in maintaining international peace and security. Fostering regional cooperation is essential in reinforcing the Council's efforts. The Council needs to further empower regional entities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America so that their initiatives receive adequate support in terms of political backing and resources. Cooperation with organizations like ASEAN, ECOWAS, African Union, for example, need to be deepened to address regional discords effectively and prevent their escalation. In conclusion, Madam President, Bangladesh, led by Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, remains committed to contributing to the UN's collective endeavors for peace, including through our robust participation in UN peacekeeping and peace building. Let us work together to ensure that multilateralism delivers to today's challenges. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hussein for his statement. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Casper Veldkamp, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President. In the past year, global security has eroded and peace seems further away than ever in the Middle East, Sudan, Ukraine, and many other regions. These conflicts and wars underscore the need for action, including protecting, strengthening, reforming the UN, including the Security Council. Let me begin with our commitment to uphold the UN Charter. Ignoring violations of the Charter undermines the foundations of our collective peace and security. And in this context, we condemn Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. The Netherlands supports Ukraine politically, militarily, financially, and morally. And yes, it is in accordance with international law for Ukraine to defend itself against the aggressor, also on the territory of the aggressor. Madam President, this morning, Germany, Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands announced to hold Afghanistan accountable for violating the rights of women and girls. Repression of women's rights by the Taliban is a shame. Madam President, we are pursuing mechanisms to hold ISIS accountable for atrocities against Yazidi and other communities, and working with partners to take the initiative to establish an international tribunal to this end.
Madam President, we must strengthen our collective efforts to alleviate suffering and restore peace. In Sudan, for example, where almost 25 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. We have pledged 80 million euros to help alleviate the immense human suffering there. We support the extension of the fact-finding mission. But what's needed most is for the fighting to stop, negotiations to resume, and obstacles to humanitarian assistance to be removed. The Netherlands stands ready to strengthen the UN's role in its global peace efforts and to use our upcoming membership of the Peace Building Commission to ensure we put people at the center of all efforts, because lasting peace is built with people, not just for them. Madam President, nearly a year has passed since the shocking violence of October 7th, and the prospects are bleak for the hostages still in captivity and for the people of Gaza, whose suffering worsens every day. We must do everything in our power to achieve a sustainable peace. We fully support those among you who are doing the heavy lifting to reach a ceasefire and will continue to work with you towards this end. We're also fully supporting efforts to lower the flames between Hezbollah, a illicit terror organization, and the State of Israel, because the risk of further escalation and more civilian casualties remains high. Madam President, by protecting, strengthening, and reforming the UN, we can pave the way to a more secure future. Please be assured that the Netherlands will stay engaged on these matters and stays ready to cooperate. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Veldkamp for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kazem Garib Abadi, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, International and Legal Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam President, thank you for organizing this timely initiative and a topic of such significance, leadership for peace. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, our world stands at critical juncture. We are facing the most conflicts since the Cold War, marked by a staggering increase in civilian casualties, especially among women, children, and humanitarian workers, and an unprecedented crisis of forced disappearance. The United Nations, the most prominent symbol of the multilateral system, which was established to prevent and manage conflicts, is under immense strain, and the bedrock of international relations, international law, and the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter are being flouted with alarming consistency. Impunity for egregious violations of international law, in particular international humanitarian law, threatens to become the norm, and this permissiveness risks undermining not just future peace efforts, but the very foundations of multilateralism. We see examples of conflict across the world today, from Gaza to Sudan to Lebanon. Each of these situations, while different, present an opportunity for the Security Council to demonstrate renewed leadership. In each, we must ask, how can we do better? How can we restore the Council's credibility and relevance in the eyes of the international community? Madam President, the United Nations Security Council is primarily responsible for maintaining international peace and security. But too often, this very body has become paralyzed by political divisions, preventing decisive action. The Security Council, regrettably, has become a tool in the hands of certain permanent members who prioritize their political and strategic interests over global peace. They manipulate the Council to pressure independent, sovereign nations while paralyzing it from acting decisively against the aggression and violations committed by their allies. The United States' repeated use of its veto power to shield Israel from accountability for its ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and now Lebanon is a glaring example of this abuse. The situation in Gaza is our collective failure to uphold international peace and security. We are witnessing an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Gaza has, as a senior United Nations official aptly described, become the hell of the earth. The reports are horrifying. Over 42,000 innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, were slaughtered by the occupying regime, with more than 93,000 wounded. In Lebanon, the deliberate targeting of civilians in densely populated areas using advanced technology for terror purposes is a blatant violation of international law, humanitarian principles, and multiple United Nations resolutions. This savage assault is not just an attack on the Lebanese people, it is an attack on humanity itself. Israel has crossed every red line. For this terrorist regime, international humanitarian law and the principle of human dignity mean nothing. Israel's leadership has no intention of pursuing peace. Its true objective is to drag the entire region into full-scale war. The Security Council's silence is deafening. It sends a dangerous message to the innocent victims of this war and the international community. The Security Council must fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter. Immediate action must be taken to halt Israel's war machine and prevent further regional escalation. The Council must act to protect civilians in Palestine and Lebanon and enforce Israel's compliance with international law and its binding resolutions. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, leadership for peace requires unity, integrity, and unwavering adherence to the United Nations Charter and international law. We cannot pick and choose which laws to uphold and when. We must demonstrate leadership by acting consistently, impartially, and with integrity. If we are to restore peace, we must first restore trust. This begins with a deep respect for international law and the United Nations Charter. Only through consistent, impartial action can we steer the world toward a more secure and peaceful future. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abadi for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Michael Martin, Tanesta and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence of Ireland.
Thank you, President, for convening us today. We meet at a dangerous moment, and I'm deeply concerned about spiralling violence in the Middle East. The scale of death, destruction, and unimaginable human suffering in Gaza is truly horrific and completely unacceptable. Israel's response to the horrific Hamas attack has been completely disproportionate. The violence must stop now. We urgently need a ceasefire and hostage release deal, followed by a massive surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This must and should be the priority. Instead, we are seeing the extension of conflict in the West Bank and now into Lebanon. This reckless escalation is deeply alarming. I'm appalled at surging settler violence in the West Bank and the ongoing efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority. This must stop. I condemn Hezbollah for its attacks on Israel and its malign role in Lebanon and the region. But massive and indiscriminate airstrikes on densely populated areas in Lebanon are resulting in a shocking loss of life and a killing of innocent men, women, and children. In my view, this violates international humanitarian law. These attacks are on a sovereign state and a United Nations member. Israel has an obligation to abide by international humanitarian law. I call on it to do so. And I call on all parties to exercise restraint. Over many years, UNIFIL has played an invaluable role in Lebanon. There are contingents from many countries here today, including 350 Irish troops. I pay tribute to all UN peacekeepers facing such a dangerous situation. A regional war would be disastrous, including for Israel. We must step back from the brink before it is too late. The only viable path to a lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians is a two-state solution. While I am under no illusions as to the challenges ahead, last week's adoption by the General Assembly of a resolution on the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice is a step in the right direction. President, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine is a threat to European and global security. A permanent member of this Council is seeking to change borders by force. It is weaponizing food, energy, and migration. It is defying the UN Charter, undermining the multilateral system,
and this very Council itself. There cannot be impunity for such wholesale breaches of international law. Ireland stands in full solidarity with Ukraine. We will work for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and Ukraine's peace formula. President, the situation in Sudan is appalling. 12 million people forced from their homes. Widespread reports of horrendous abuses against civilians, particularly women and girls. The scourge of hunger and famine. We need to speak with one voice to demand a ceasefire, humanitarian access, protection of civilians, and accountability for human rights abuses. We also need to see external actors behave responsibly and cease their involvement and support for the conflict. To do whatever it takes to pressure the parties to come back to the negotiating table and bring to an end this destructive cycle of violence. In conclusion, President, in these and so many other conflicts, we see the obligations of international law cast aside. We see various serious violations of international law go unanswered and international crimes go unpunished. We see a lack of accountability leading to a culture of impunity, and we see resolutions of this Council left unenforced. We have spoken a lot about the future this week and adopted the Pact for the Future. What we need now is political will, for leaders to speak out, to protect multilateralism and the United Nations Charter. If we fail to do so, we condemn this generation and the next to a very uncertain and dangerous future. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Martin for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Singapore.
Thank you, Madam President, and members of the Security Council. The world is in an acutely dangerous phase, and civilians in multiple trouble spots are paying a terrible price. And so the United Nations is at an inflection point. We need to reform the multilateral and UN institutions to address both current and future challenges, including reform of this very Security Council. First, we must constrain the exercise of the veto. All permanent members should focus on the broader goal of delivering international peace and security. However, the trend of the increasing exercise of the vetoes suggests that we cannot leave this to the P5 to voluntarily change their behavior. The wider UN membership must reach agreement on how the veto is exercised in the future, and Singapore stands ready to discuss this further at the General Assembly. The approach is not to encroach on the Council's mandate, but to guard against actions that prevent this Council from fulfilling its mandate. Second, the Council must do more to prevent conflicts. The Council should work more closely and effectively with the other main organs of the UN to facilitate both early warning and response. Article 99 of the UN Charter is in fact a powerful preventive diplomacy tool. I'm glad that the Pact for the Future alluded to this. However, this Council needs to react more quickly with a concrete response when the Secretary General invokes Article 99, particularly for humanitarian catastrophes and mass atrocities. Third, we need to strengthen the role of elected members of this Council. We have seen how the E10 bridges gaps when the P5 were instead mired in mutual distrust and paralysis. Given the powerful bridging role of the E10, elected members should have a greater say in pen holdership and decision-making, and be allowed to lead or co-lead on key issues, particularly concerning their respective regions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Dr. Balakrishnan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Hassan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday evening, the streets of Midtown were filled with the voices of grieving. They were grieving the killing of over 500 people in Lebanon, a heinous mass murder which is made all the more shameful by the fact that it happened as world leaders gathered under the banner of United Nations. They also mourn the fact that it has almost been 1 year of the non-stop slaughter of the people of Gaza by the brutal Israel regime. Various instruments of international law prescribe the rules governing our conduct. Why then have we failed? Leadership for peace, united in respect of the United Nations Charter. This is the theme of our gathering today, but in the eyes of the world's population, it sounds like a punchline. For over 300 days now, Madam President, the Security Council seems to have forgotten the existence of the United Nations Charter. Had this Council fulfilled its Charter-mandated role as the custodian of the global peace and security, we would have neither allowed nor witnessed the murder of more than 41,000 innocent people, many of them children, by Israel and Gaza over the past 11 months. Everywhere, Madam President, the same question echoed. Is the UN too broken to be fixed? The answer is certainly no, as there is indeed a way, and only one way, to fix the United Nations. The veto must be limited. This is what happened. This is what needs to happen, not just to save the people of Gaza, but to save the United Nations. The world is watching as the Security Council struggles to free itself from a deadlock in which one voice can overrule the majority, disregard the clearly stated principles of United Nations Charter, and supported the continued violation of international law. Make no mistake, Madam President, this is becoming an existential crisis for the United Nations and a test of its relevance and fitness for purpose. Last week, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 10/24 by an overwhelming majority. This is a success that we hope will not be tampered with by the power of veto in the Security Council. We, Malaysia, demand that this Council support the full implementation of the resolution. Remember that the world is watching, Madam President. Do not risk disillusioning us. Do not risk disillusioning us. It is the member states that give the United Nations its credibility and not the other way around. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Hassan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mauro Luís Sequeira Vieira, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil.
Madam President, Brazil commends Slovenia for organizing this high-level open debate and thanks the Secretary General and the briefers for their insights. The world looks at the UN Security Council for leadership, yet what they see is a body struggling to uphold its own mandate, hamstrung by geopolitical divides and double standards. As we speak, Lebanon stands on the edge of a conflict, potentially dragging the region along. The people of Lebanon are suffering not only from political instability and economic collapse, but from the paralysis of this council. The illegal and indiscriminate attacks on the Lebanese people and their sovereignty, along with the subsequent exchange of violence, have resulted in casualties of over 100,000 displaced in southern Lebanon. The consequences for Israel are also severe, with at least 60,000 people forced to flee their homes in the north. The Security Council's lack of decisive action to prevent another humanitarian catastrophe raises concerns about its effectiveness and underscores its poor records in exerting leadership on peace and security. The plight of Palestine is a case in point. We have been witnessing the routine breaches of international humanitarian law in Gaza, where countless reports show that civilian areas are being indiscriminately and disproportionately struck in military operations. Critical infrastructure has been destroyed, worsening the suffering of innocent civilians and spreading famine and disease. Moreover, humanitarian personnel, doctors and health workers protected under the Geneva Conventions have been killed. Journalists have been shot or detained, and news outlets have been shut down. Yet, time after time, resolutions are blocked and the veto is wielded like a weapon of impunity. This is not leadership, this is abdication of responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot have double standards for peace. Every civilian affected by conflict deserves the same level of protection and advocacy. The lives of all individuals in conflict zones are equally valuable, and our actions should reflect this fundamental truth by ensuring that the rights and safety of all civilians are protected with the same vigor and resolve. The value of every life, Ukrainian, Yemeni, Lebanese, Palestinian, or Sudanese, must be upheld as universally inviolable. The principles of international justice and human dignity must transcend geopolitical boundaries. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to rethink the entire UN system. Among other improvements, we need a council that serves all humanity, not the interests of a few. Let's be bold and ambitious, as President Lula emphasized during his participation in the activities of the General Assembly this year. The future of global peace depends on our ability to lead effectively and in doing so, to deliver justice for all. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Vieira for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Theodora Gentsis, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belgium.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. La Belgique reste profondément convaincue qu'un multilatéralisme efficace, fondé sur des règles et traduit dans des actes, est notre seule option pour trouver des solutions communes, justes et durables en faveur de la paix et la sécurité. C'est la promesse contenue dans la Charte des Nations Unies, un engagement qui repose sur le respect des principes et des règles qui s'imposent à tout le monde et qui ne sont pas à géométrie variable. Mesdames et Messieurs, il n'y a jamais d'autre horizon possible que le règlement pacifique des conflits. Depuis plus de 2 ans, la Belgique demande la paix pour l'Ukraine, une paix qui doit être juste et durable. L'annexion de pans entiers de territoires ukrainiens ne peut être un prérequis au dialogue. La Belgique plaide également pour la relance d'un processus politique négocié à Gaza afin de mettre en place une solution à 2 États, seule perspective pour conjuguer les aspirations légitimes du peuple palestinien à l'autodétermination avec les garanties sécuritaires attendues par Israël. La Belgique apporte tout son soutien au processus diplomatique qui tente de restaurer le dialogue et la paix, qu'il s'agisse des efforts de médiation en cours au Moyen-Orient ou ceux à l'œuvre pour mettre un terme aux conflits meurtriers qui ravagent le Soudan ou l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo. Mesdames et Messieurs, je parlais des principes et des règles qui s'imposent à nous. Les règles du droit international humanitaire sont simples, universelles. Elles s'imposent dans leur totalité, à toutes les parties et dans tous les conflits, pour protéger la dignité des civils et réduire les souffrances qui leur sont infligées. Les attaques indiscriminées qui blessent ou tuent les civils, y compris les travailleurs humanitaires et le personnel médical, détruisent les hôpitaux, les écoles et les infrastructures indispensables au maintien d'une vie digne, sont inacceptables. Elles sont inacceptables partout. Il doit y avoir un prix à payer pour les violences infligées aux populations dont les conséquences se font sentir sur des générations. Il faut donner aux survivants les moyens de garder espoir dans la force du droit, afin de rompre avec le cycle de la violence et parvenir à une paix durable. C'est ce que signifie la lutte contre l'impunité. Mesdames et messieurs, en toutes circonstances, ces principes et ces règles doivent rester notre boussole, afin de préserver la confiance que nous plaçons les uns dans les autres. Une confiance qui rend possible la coopération internationale. Ce Conseil se doit d'en être le garant. Il doit faire usage de l'entièreté de sa boîte à outils pour assurer la mise en œuvre de ces résolutions. La Belgique lui accorde son plein soutien pour ce faire, ainsi qu'à toute action concrète des membres élus, dont je salue ici l'engagement allant dans ce sens. Je vous remercie.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Gintzis for her statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting, and I intend, with the concurrence of the members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until tomorrow, 6 p.m. The meeting is suspended.